And today's broadcast is brought to you by Eclectic Horseman Magazine. Stay tuned for Eclectic Conversations hosted by Emily Kitchen.
We're back today visiting with Dr. Deb on volume 3 of her book on Conformation. And we're so excited to get to talk about this particular volume, the feet. I'm super excited. It's something that I'm learning more and more about earnestly. So I'm excited to visit with you today about this topic.
Yeah, well, this is immediate for you.
Yes.
Because you've had some lameness issues recently. And thank you, by the way, for thanking me in your op-ed in the last issue. But you know, that's worked for me. We don't need to go into detail as to what your particular problems are, because everybody's got problems with this. And there are some very easy to understand historical reasons why people have difficulty getting adequate service from their farrier. That there are good reasons for this. And so the very first thing I need to say is, farriers, I'm not blaming you. Okay, that's to begin with, because farriers take enough flack as it is, and they work awful hard in the heat of the summer over a hot forge. I mean, it's not a job that I am signing up for or that I could ever possibly do. You know, I often advise farriers as to what would be either somebody else they need to talk to kind of get in dialogue, and that could include the veterinarian, you know, a little closer relationship there. But it also might include particulars as to what a horse needs in terms of the trim. And why am I doing that?
Why?
Well, because the farrier asked. It's pretty hard to get a farrier. That's the downside of farriers. There can be an ego in there, and there can be a great reluctance to take instruction from a woman. Honestly, you know, I wrote a really hot, really useful set of articles about 3 years ago for one of the leading American farrier magazines. And it was, why is that necessary? I'm teaching them stuff about the anatomy of the legs that no one else has taught them, but which you have to have in order to do that profession. So a lot of our guys are out there, even if they're certified. The certification routine in the U.S. began, and the farriers associations began with what are jokingly called iron men. In other words, people, and they were men and not women, who were expert at the forge, and for whom the creation of a sample set of horseshoes that you could, on a sheet of plywood that you could put up on the barn wall, show all these different types of shoes that you could make on the forge. For them, that was what was central in their mind. It took years before to get certified. They got off the idea, or at least somewhat off the idea, that they would just, what do they do during a certification? They bring a horse in to each guy who's trying out. And they are to clean the foot up. But that does not mean they understand what that horse needed orthopedically. Mm-hmm. And they typically do not understand that. And they're graded until very recently. Almost all of the score had to do with how well the shoe was made and how well it was nailed on and fitted to whatever foot presented itself. No matter how badly out of balance that hoof was, that never even got over the horizon. So the other part of this is, as I was saying, this is still a male-dominated field. And although they have, the enlightened men have welcomed women into that profession. While I was writing this series for this magazine, one of my articles appeared in the December issue, and it just happened to. And I had to call the editor and tell him that I was absolutely embarrassed to notice that on the same page with the part of the text of my article, there was an advertisement from a company that makes anvils in which they're using a half-naked, very attractive woman who is obviously naked under the farrier's apron. Okay, no reputable magazine will print an ad of that kind. You cannot print that ad in a newspaper. You cannot print it in Equus magazine. You cannot print it in Western Horseman magazine, which is the other biggest magazine in the US. You cannot print it in the Chronicle of the Horse. And I said, you guys got to wake up, because you got to cut that stuff out, because unless you do, I can't see how any woman can believe that you're sincere in welcoming them into the profession.
Mm-hmm.
You have to learn to, and I've had this happen more than once, where I will be giving a lecture at the invitation of the woke individuals in the Farriers Association at a particular state. And some jackass shows up and throws spitwads from the back row or heckles.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason is they lack self-confidence. They lack self-confidence. If they had confidence, they could stand up there and disagree with me straight up. But they don't even listen to what was said. What all it is it's threatening to them, because we're little boys. We're not grown-up men. We're not grown-up adults. So we have to get all the grown-ups at the table here. So another reason why it's difficult to get good service is due to the instigation or the beginning of the modern veterinary practice laws. Most farriers have, I think, been made aware of this, but most horse owners are not aware of it, which is to say that no farrier practices legally. They all practice with one state that I know of, which would be Maryland. But outside the state of Maryland, it is illegal, formally illegal, for a non-veterinarian to shoe a horse. You are practicing veterinary medicine without a license, even if you do not draw blood or do anything that might draw blood. And why is that? Or how do we get farrier service in any other state? By the courtesy of the veterinary board of that state. They have a discretionary power to allow, but that also gives them a way to have them on a short chain. The veterinarians have the farriers on a short leash.
Mm-hmm.
If they are caught doing anything that could make the horse bleed, like resections, and some veterinarian complains, pretty quick that farrier is going to get a letter from the district attorney saying cease and desist. He's going to get a cease and desist order. So you are getting farrier service because a veterinary board allows it, not because there is any right to practice farriery out other than in the state of Maryland, to my knowledge. I mean, there may be some recent changes in the laws in certain other states, and I'm happy if that's true. But this makes it difficult because, let's say the veterinarians are not grown-ups either, and they are threatened by very competent farriers. Who are they going to then go after? It's the farrier who's trying new stuff and who,
Right,
is doing essentially what is by the law is defined as surgery, but it's not really surgery, as we all know. It's
right.
what the horse needs. Now, if that implies that we need also to get, as I said, all the grown-ups at the table so that the farrier and the veterinarian communicate better, that's ideal. That's ideal. But I also, of course, advocate the teaching of anatomy and biomechanics to farriers. Now, that raises a third issue, which is that when the recent veterinary laws were begun, which is in the right after World War II, essentially, you had the veterinary boards telling the farriers, all right, we're going to allow you guys to work, but you better not do anything that looks like surgery, and you better not do orthopedics, because that's veterinary practice. And by orthopedics, they mean like bracing legs.
Okay.
Or even building appliances that might help to brace a crooked leg. And I've seen people who were licensed as orthopods for human practice, which is also illegal. You are not to cross that boundary. And I've seen extremely excellent human orthopods who happen to also be horse owners turn to making and designing very superior ways of straightening out a horse's leg, a foal's leg, and be pursued legally until they just gave up. Now, incidentally, it is legal to do almost anything to your own horse. Where you get in trouble is when you start sharing it with your neighbors for money. And that tells you why certain veterinarians are going to complain. This becomes a territory issue. They have to make a living. I mean, my God, they've got bills left over from when they were in school. You know, they're still paying off their loan. It's horrible. But we still have to get grown-ups at the table. So that is enough said background.
Okay.
To allow anybody watching this to realize why I think it's important to talk about it, because I want farriers to watch this and learn and be willing to learn, and I want owners to watch this just the same. Now, I promise you, there is nothing on earth as irritating to most farriers as having an owner trot out and tell them what to do. That is likely not, and that's not grown-up behavior either. Okay, I want the owner to be knowledgeable, but also respectful, because it's the farrier who's got to bend over there and risk getting kicked. And boy, that's a whole area for horsemanship, isn't it? But it's
for sure.
Not our topic today, but deserves mention. So I'm going to begin. If you would put that image up that I asked for first before I do the reading.
Okay.
Because I think that's kind of also very necessary background. And I'll tell another funny story that has to do with this image.
Okay.
Right.
Can you see it now?
Yep. Perfect.
Okay.
When I was employed at the Smithsonian Institution at the United States Museum of Natural History, which was in the mid-1980s and early 1990s, I used to regularly be asked, they knew I was, quote unquote, the horse lady. And they still call me that. And they still forward letters to me that are addressed to me at the Smithsonian. And it doesn't even have my name. It just says the horse lady. They know who was meant, and they continue to forward those letters. So I used to give these tours to groups like the 4-H club or this or that pony club, or a college or a junior college that taught a horse program of some type. And one of the commonest questions that, because what these tours were, there were all kinds of, there's zillions of it. You could spend a week in the National Museum, easy. And most people schedule way too little time when they go visit the Smithsonian because they don't realize how big it is. So I had my choice of fossil horses from the Miocene, Pliocene, and Pleistocene on exhibit, full skeletons, I had the bone hull as it used to be. It's no longer that way anymore. They've redesigned it. They have to do that periodically. And in fact, the main skeleton we used to look at was the skeleton of Lexington, the famous 19th century racehorse. That skeleton has been permanently loaned now to the Kentucky Horse Park, which it's an excellent place for it. So, but it used to be in the Bone Hall in Washington, D.C., in the National Museum. So one of the commonest questions I used to get was, we'd look at all these skeletons and they would look at the hind legs of the horse and they would tug on my little tour jacket and they would say, Dr. Deb, why do the horse's hind knees face backwards?
Mm-hmm.
Their hind knees.
Mm-hmm.
They don't understand that there are big differences in proportionality, which is to say big differences in conformation. Conformation is the study of bodily proportions. There is huge differences in the lower part of the limb in horses versus people. And that's what this picture shows. Equivalent bones are colored similarly. So the horse in their hind leg, that's not their knee. It seems to a person that is not familiar with skeletons much, it seems like it might be a knee because it's about the height of your own knee.
Yeah.
But your knee bends frontwards and their quote unquote hind knee, which is their hock, bends the other way. Why is that? Because it isn't their knee. The stifle is the anatomical equivalent of the human knee, the horse's stifle joint, which is one higher. This is their ankle. Yeah. So the purple bones are the big the talus and the astragalus, or the calcaneus and the astragalus bone, or the veterinarian calls them the fibular tarsal and the tibial tarsal. Okay, the one to the front is the tibial tarsal because it articulates with the tibia. And the other one is called the fibular tarsal because it doesn't actually articulate with the fibula, but it's kind of on the same side. So that's what they call it. I come from zoology, which uses a different set of terms, an older and more traditional set of terms, which you will still see in some anatomy books written by veterinarians. Mm-hmm. So it depends on the age of the book you're looking at. So I call them the astragalus and the calcaneum. All right, below the purple bones, you have, those are called tarsal bones. Below them are metatarsal bones, which form in the human the arch of the foot. Okay. They're colored blue here. Now in the person, the one that's pertains to the big toe, which is closest to you, is colored gray because it doesn't develop in horses. Horses stand on the third metatarsal bone. In other words, if you count, if it's the same in the hand, if you count from medial to lateral, this is the first digit, this is the second digit, this is the third digit, this is the fourth, and this is the fifth. So don't you think I had fun one time when I was giving this lecture to a bunch of mounted patrolmen. And I said, the horse stands on this toe. And guys, I've been trying to do this to you for years and years. And not all of them laughed. They're so serious. Too serious. I mean, their job is terrible, but I'm kidding, all right? That's what they stand on. Their leg is facing this way and they stand on this digit. Okay. Now in my hand, my metacarpals are the ones that span the gap or the distance between my knuckle and my wrist. My wrist is my carpus. These are my metacarpals. These are my digits. Below the knuckles is the digits. So I can't really hold my foot up for you, but there's a picture there. So the bones that form the arch of your foot are what we call in the horse the splint bones and the cannon bone. And so he's got one big one that he stands on, that's the third metatarsal. And then the two splints are pertaining to what would have been a first finger and a ring finger. But there are no toe bones, that's the next unit down, and they are colored tan and yellow. So you've got a long pastern, a short pastern, and a coffin bone, or proximal phalanx, second phalanx, and distal phalanx. Okay, those are plural, is the singular is phalanx, or sometimes phalange, that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
And plural is phalanges. Okay, there are 3 phalanges in each digit in the human, except the thumb, which only has 2. In other words, there's 2 joints. But in your fingers, there's 3 joints if you're formed in a normal manner.
Mm-hmm.
So the horse is standing on the tip, on the last joint of the middle finger. And he stands on that in the front legs too, and in the hind legs. Now, the hoof is the equivalent of the nail, which is greatly larger and heavier in an ungulate, which is to say a hoofed animal, than it is in people. But it is the anatomical equivalent. So you're not seeing their back knees bend backwards.
Right.
You're looking at their ankle joint. Now, what does this mean? Where is your foot? What would you call your foot? Well, you would call the part of your body that goes from the top there of the talus, of the calcaneus, the big heel bone, and I think the ankle joint, anything below the ankle joint, would be your foot. So where's the horse's foot anatomically?
It's the whole lower half of the hind leg.
That's right. That's right. Now, in horsemanship or around the barn, we normally only think of the parts that are within the hoof or right near the hoof as being his foot. But that's not accurate anatomically. And I think we need to learn that little fact before we can really understand how the horse's hind limb works altogether. So the sole of his foot is the whole, if you were to palpate him, all the way from the top of the hock, down the back of the leg, around the ankle joint, around the back of the pastern, and down to the digital cushion, which is between the bulbs of heel. That's all the sole of his foot.
Wow.
Yeah, plus the sole of, which we call the sole of the hoof.
Mm-hmm.
So that is the, and this is called homology when we study it in a zoology class. And you have to have this idea kind of straight before you're going to be able to really visualize what's happening or understand what the significance of conformational variability. In other words, one horse with lower hocks or higher hocks, a wider cannon bone or a skinny one, more substantial sesamoids, and a wider, stronger ankle, or not so much, longer pasterns, or not so much. So you will at least understand which part of the foot they pertain to. Now, I should also mention, just incidentally, in passing, that sesamoids are not bones. They're pseudobones. Okay, what they are, developmentally or from the embryo, is ossified intratendinal bursae. They are thickened spots in the tendon that passes around the back of that joint, which in this case would be the deep digital flexor tendon, the tendon of the deep digital flexor muscle. Because you remember from our first talk, there is no such thing as a tendon in and of itself. All tendons are actually the extension of a muscle.
Mhm.
which is usually located in horses far above. Okay, and they send these long tendons down to the ends of the legs. Well, the sesamoids develop in a horse at a point in their intrauterine development. The bursa that it starts out as kind of congeals and then becomes ossified to make it ever so tough. And once you prepare a skeleton by maceration or by putting a dead horse over an ant mound, and those carnivorous little boogers will take every bit of flesh away. It's an excellent way to get a horse skeleton if you should desire to have a horse skeleton. Or you can strip it off mechanically with a knife and carefully scrape away and then rinse and sort of boil and prepare a skeleton. Once you do that, it's no longer obvious that sesamoid was embedded in that tendon. And it looks for all the world exactly like the other bones. But the difference is real bones have what is called a periosteum, which is, you can call it the skin of the bone. There is a clear membranous wrapping that invests every true bone, but does not invest sesamoids. And that the periosteum, the space between the periosteum and the bone itself, is all full of immune cells, tiny blood vessels, and cells that build or take away bone. So that if you break your arm, it will heal. Probably, if you get medical attention that reduces the fracture. Even if you don't, if you're a caveman and you broke your arm, okay, as long as it doesn't get infected, it's going to heal somehow. It's probably going to be all twisted and lumpy, but it will heal because it's got the circulation supply and the immune cells and the bone cells right there to help the healing happen, because that's what's needed. Sesamoids don't have that because they don't have a periosteum.
Okay.
So they fracture a sesamoid, they're dead.
Okay.
Okay. As far as, remember Barbaro as the worst, most immoral set of propaganda, feeding the media to try to fend the blame off of whoever might have been blamed, the racing industry, the particular owner, the trainer, who knows. He breaks his ankle at the end of the Belmont, I think it was, and he's unable to rise. So they sling him up into a horse ambulance and they take him to the veterinary hospital. And the brave young veterinarian gets to be the fall guy, because he says, the first press release is, I don't know if we can help him. And then everybody's rooting for him. So pretty soon you get these optimistic press releases. And then finally he goes downhill, because they all do. It's very, very difficult to heal a broken bone in a horse.
Mm-hmm.
It's not that they won't heal or that you can't do surgically some of the same things you could do for a person. But what happens? Do you know what happens to horses who are in the sling for a month? They founder on all three other feet.
Yeah.
Because the health of their feet depends on their being able to move. At pressure and then release of pressure, pressure and then release of pressure. That's what makes the circulation work in the distal limb.
Mm-hmm.
So these are just some facts. I mean, the fact that publicity was managed and they strung the horse's life out a couple of months so that, anything that happens in the media is forgotten in 3 days. You know that as a magazine publisher. And I know that as somebody that writes for magazines. I don't care how controversial or hot a topic I may have written and my editor published. and we get 3 letters from concerned readers or 50 letters or whatever it was in 3 months, it's just like dropping your wallet out of your breast pocket when you're bending over your fishing boat. When you bend over and your wallet falls out and it goes to the bottom of the lake. That's what magazine publishing is like. And it makes an income for those of us who do it, because darn well you're going to have to do that same article or something similar in about 1.5 years, because they won't have seen the other one, and if they did, they forgot it already. So what I'm saying is you got to learn this. You got to learn this. This is simple stuff that's in any biology book, or it's in any horse anatomy. Okay, with that much background, I want you to put up the other one that I need before we can understand what I'm about to say. Is you see this one?
Okay.
It's the one that's from the old Gobow and Berrier. This is where our problems come from in one way. Right. And that is a drawing that appears in a book that was published in the middle 1890s by 2 French veterinarians, very good workers they were too. Exciting book. It's called The Exterior of the Horse, and it was promptly translated and well translated into English. And you can buy one. You call up Robin Bledsoe, bookseller. She'll find it for you, or email her or Google her on the internet. She's a primary equestrian historical bookseller in the United States. She's a great gal, friend of mine, and I love to give her a plug. You want a copy of Gobow and Berrier, she'll get it for you. And it will cost you probably $150, maybe more, depending on in how good a shape the old book happens to be. Robin and I have a wonderful relationship whereby she understands that I want the rattiest old copy she can find, because I'm not collecting them to look at them. I collect them to use them. And I tell everybody that all my books are dirty. They are very well thumbed.
Yeah.
So this is an image that comes out of Gobow and Berrier. Now, if in some future life we do another one of these talks, and it's on the front legs, evaluating the front legs, there is the same picture in Gobow and Berrier from the front, and I'll show that one at that time. Now, this picture was drawn by a guy who was trained as an engineer. And this is a draftsman in the old sense. And he draws the hind limbs like they were table legs.
Mm-hmm.
If you build a table, you do not want the legs all going kitty wumpus. Right. You want, if the leg has like the shape of a board, and you're going to build a table with legs made out of boards, you naturally are going to orient the boards parallel to the midline of the tabletop.
Right.
Unfortunately, there are no mammals who stand this way. Any mammal that stands like that is twisting every joint. You see this same drawing in some form or other reproduced in every book but mine that is on conformation, every pony club manual, every 4-H manual, and it's absolutely totally destructive. It's wrong, and it's unsustainable and unworkable. So we got to understand what is a correct idea of how mammals stand. That includes you, by the way, even though we're only bipedal. But it also applies to your cat, your dog. Once you learn how to judge horses, judge a conformation class and do it properly, you can judge dogs, sheep, anything. The only further training you would need would be if it's a lactating species, and that's part of why we keep them. Then you got to learn about udder anatomy and udder quality and teats and stuff. But we don't have to worry about that with horses. But this is absolutely not a real picture. It's an ideal created by the right brain. Sorry, the left brain. The side that calculates, the side that tries for all it's worth to simplify reality. Okay, we need the right brain because that's where we do our adding and subtracting and stuff. But that is not how it works. Now, in the book, I go through this whole fun history, starting with Leonardo da Vinci, who was one of the first people to be able to draw a horse's hindquarters from the back correctly, because he's a genius. He's brilliant. So, but they do not stand with their hind hocks, with their hocks facing straight backwards and their toes facing straight forwards. And if they do, something is terribly wrong. So now I'm going to read you the reading.
Okay. Do you want me to leave this on the screen?
Yeah, sure, because it's going to refer to it. A horse that stands normally has both hind toes oriented outward and both hocks oriented inward. Many people confuse this with the horse being cow-hocked, and we're going to clear that completely up today. Some folks are so stuck on the idea that a horse's hocks should face straight backwards and its hind toes straight forwards, like this picture, that they ask their farrier to quote unquote correct their horse's already normal hind stance, and how these quote unquote incorrect corrections are effected typically are by either lowering one or the other walls of the hind foot so that you're doing either this or that, depending on what you think works, or else the application of a shoe with a trailer. A trailer is a horseshoe with a trailer will typically have the trailer on the outside branch, and it's like you had the horseshoe come around here, and then there's this extension off the outside. That's the trailer. No matter what a horse's hind limb orientation may be, it is important for the long-term soundness of the animal to maintain what the animal presents and not try to force the hind limb to match an arbitrary ideal. This is the arbitrary ideal, this picture that's on your screen. Again, a horse that stands normally has both hind toes oriented outward and both hocks oriented inward. Attempts to force the horse to stand with toes facing, as in this image, toes facing straight forward and hocks facing straight backward. Attempts to force the horse to stand that way are destructive of the horse's long-term soundness, sometimes even his short-term soundness, because that is not the way the joints are built to work. The horse that has been subjected to so-called corrective shoeing twists and strains the joints of the hind limb with every step he takes. Okay? You've got to get this picture out of your head. A horse's hind limb is made, the joints, what are the joints? Hind limb. The hip socket is way up here. The stifle is where their britches are. And then there's the hock, which is, you've already noticed. And then there's the ankle. And then there's other joints that are within the coffin joint that's within the hoof. So you have to understand that the hip socket, which is where the thigh bone plugs into the pelvis, that is not built, that socket in which the top of the ball of the femur fits is not oriented plumb straight sideways. It's at an angle. And likewise, as you come down the thigh bone, to its articulation with the gaskin or the tibia bone at the that's what forms the stifle joint. That joint is tilted also, and the hock bones are tilted too. So I didn't have you run these up, but I marked them in volume 3 here so you can maybe see them, some of them, because I show them all in the book, of course.
Mhm.
So that's a picture of the pelvis, and if you can see it, you see the arrows coming out of the hip sockets. They're not facing straight out. They're not made to do that. And here is the, can't see, that's a picture of the ball of the, gotta get it in square in front there. Picture of the ball of the at the top of the femur that fits into that socket. That's not oriented straight in like it was a mechanical robot.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay, and the stifle joint in this picture, I can't see. Yeah, the stifle joint is oblique. And if we turn the next page, the hock joint is made of the top image is the dead-on end view of the tibia, and that's the astragalus, which is the big ankle bone, the tibial tarsal bone. See how the it's shaped like a pulley, but it's been stepped on apparently. It angles off to one side.
Yeah.
That's so they can do what Ollie is caught in the act. Of course, I got him to do that by hosing him with the hose and then turning him right out in a really dusty arena. So instantly he wants to lie down. And then I said to my photographer, be ready. And she's really good. And she was ready, and she caught him in the perfect moment. That is a very important picture. You can learn more about collection by watching a horse lie down than by almost any other way. Because remember yesterday we said, or in our last talk, we said they have to use their lower back in order to use their stifles.
Mm-hmm.
If you want the stifles to flex easily, they first have to unlock, they have to break down. Cowboys call it breaking down over the top. They have to flex, they have to coil their loins. What is Ollie doing there? He's getting ready to squat.
Yeah.
Which is what they do when they lie down. So he's showing you what you're going to have to get him to do if you want him to collect. You have to get their back to work right, because the back and the junction between their back and their hock via their stifle, they can't operate their hind leg without operating, because it's governed by the back. And that's what we talked about in our last talk. Now, you can stick up another picture and we'll look at what the hind leg, how to actually conceive of the hind leg. Now, in conformation judging in the United States, B is usually considered to be correct. But it's not correct. That horse will never sit down for a slide. I was in my office one day in the late 80s after principles of conformation analysis had become available to purchase, and the phone rang, and it was a very famous guy who was a superstar in reining. And he said, I just read your book, Dr. Deb, and it's the first time I'm so happy to have seen it, because you explain something I've noticed for years, which is that if I buy a halter winner whose hind legs look like B, he can't perform. He will not sit down for that slide. So what is normal and correct is D, as in dog. So you notice how this is called the plane of assessment method, because it recognizes something that the old Gobau and Berrier illustration also didn't. You notice that they're asking you to judge the correct alignment and articulation of the hind limb as a whole by using a mere line.
Mm-hmm.
But a horse's hind leg is a three-dimensional object, and no three-dimensional object can be adequately or fully described by a one-dimensional line. You have to have a plane. So I always use the concept of the shoebox in space. So you got this shoebox that's like slowly rotating in space, and you want it to stop. So let's pull a string through that shoebox from one end to the other. And we tauten the string and we hold our arms in the same place, and the shoebox stops doing this. But it doesn't stop doing this. It can still spin around that line. So the line tells you nothing about the orientation of the limb as a whole relative to the midline plane of the body. Only a plane driven through the limb can do that.
Okay.
Okay, so you got the shoebox rotating in space, and you drive a glass sheet through it, and you hold on to the ends of the sheet. It's not going to move this way, and it's also not going to spin. You have stopped it, which in mathematical terms means you have adequately described it. You've pinned it down. So D is how your horse is supposed to be built. And if you have a horse that is built like that, he needs no correction whatsoever. The plane of assessment is telling you that the thigh bone, which is up there at the top, and then the Gaskin bone, the tibia, that is between the stifle joint and the hock, that's just above the hock, the hind cannon bone, and the hind hoof are all uniplanar. They are all bisected by the same plane. There are no twists in that plane. There are no bends in that plane. It's planar. That's what tells you that this limb is correctly made. It also tells you that the limb as a whole, that the center plane of that limb, which is shown in blue here, diverges from the center plane of the body, and ought to. Now, why does it need to diverge? We'll see that in a minute. It's so that their stifle does not impinge their belly when they bring their leg forward, but I'll show you that in another image in a moment. Now, D is normal and correct, but is mistaken for cowhocked by 99% of people who think they know what they're doing, but they don't. Horse show judges who ought to know better, I'm well aware they don't. One time, I was on the podium, one of the speakers at Cal Expo, and they have all kinds of people come in there and talk to them. And I always go out of my way to attend the other people's talks. So once I'm done, I go and sit in the back row. You know, I want other people that have come there and paid money to come in to have, you know, an unobstructed view of whoever is presenting whatever they're presenting. So I'm sitting in the back row, and I've just finished lecturing on this. Mm-hmm. And this guy from Texas, who is going to also talk about conformation, because Cal Expo management has not always been really careful about exactly what educational opportunity they are offering. So this guy gets up to the front. He has not bothered to attend my talk. And he starts saying, and I've even heard that this, and he's telling them that what I have just told them is incorrect, because it's not what his daddy taught him. It's not what he grew up with. But this guy does not train horses. He breeds what? What do you guess he breeds?
Halter horses?
Right. And which are judged absolutely contrary to biological and biomechanical principles. So the guy stands up there and says, and I've even heard this, right? And points to his image of view D as being wrong. Every person in that audience turned and looks at me, and it's like they're going like, they understood what I taught them.
Yeah.
And they knew this guy is an ignoramus. He's an ignoramus. But we have to change our books. We have to stop breeding horses that look like B, because they can't perform. Now, if you're going to run quarter horse halter on the basis of we don't care if they can perform, fine. However, that is not the world I'm living in. You can go on and do any game you want to, because although I'm sorry, because the breeding of horses who are not athletic and who cannot perform is to say you want your breed to become extinct. And I'm not in control of that, but I want you to know what it means.
Mm-hmm.
There is a long-term picture here, which is almost never considered. It's like we were talking about the inbreeding, very high degrees of inbreeding in thoroughbred racehorses and also in quarter horse racehorses. If you only breed winners to winners, in other words, you're only breeding for speed, and you don't care about hoof quality, and you don't care about how strong or weak their ankles are, then pretty soon you're going to pay for it by the imbroglio at Santa Anita. Anything but blame the breeders, so they replaced the track. Well, I suppose. But this sort of a problem did not arise when Man of War was run over that track. Those old horses ran on bullpen tracks and did fine. But if you breed horses with teeny little sesamoids in their front legs, then you're going to have breakdowns.
Yeah.
So, but to get back to this, so D is correct, B is not correct, C is obviously not correct. That's blatant bow legs. And you get that in, actually, most of the time, they're not innate to the animal. When you see that configuration standing up, it's because the horse has been corrected, which is to say incorrectly corrected, to try to get it to face the toes forward. Typically, this will be a wide-bodied, round rib cage individual who really would toe out behind quite a bit and have his ankle. In other words, the angle, the plane of assessment would normally face rather strongly outward to the front. Why? Again, because he's got a wide belly, he's got a wide rib cage. He has to be able to clear the rib cage with the stifle joint when he takes a step. And that requires that the orientation of the hind limb be more at an angle and less parallel. If you have a real flat-bodied, slab-sided type of horse, they will sometimes, without any help at all, stand like B, only their hind legs will be closer together. Okay, they'll be, because they're narrow-bodied. But that's the opposite with them. If you have a narrow-bodied horse, they don't require much outward angulation. When they bring their leg forward, it will probably clear the ribs, and he's not kicking himself in the belly with every stride he takes. Now, A is cow hocks. What is going on in A? What, Emily? Look at it and tell me. Look at C and notice where the face of the hock is in C relative to the plane.
So the hocks are on the inside of the plane.
In which?
In A.
Yes. And they're on, where are they in C?
they're on the outside of the plane.
That's right.
And
And
so
also in B.
right. And so does the placement of the hock on the plane originate in how the insertion into the pelvis? Like where does that start?
Yes, because A, B, and C are faulty, incorrect, or abnormal in the articulation at the joints. They're not built right.
Okay.
That's why they're not athletic. Only
Okay.
B is showing you that he has normal square on articulations within the limb, that his joints are normally formed, which means they're going to work without friction, or as close to without friction as the body can manage with synovial fluid and by the shaping of the joints.
Mm-hmm.
So A, and this is taught sometimes, and I've heard it taught, so I want to give credit where somebody's doing something right. In A, their hind cannons tilt inward,
Mm-hmm.
so that you see the letter A.
Mm-hmm.
In C, they make the letter V, more or less. In B, what fools them with B is that it's the letter H, which is what you're supposed to see. Unfortunately, however, the toes are facing forward, but the stifles aren't. So that's what puts the hock outside the plane. That limb is twisting.
Okay.
Okay, so B is incorrect, faulty. C is incorrect, faulty. A is incorrect, faulty. It's like building a building and not getting your girders squared up. Only D is your athletic horse. And I don't care what it is you're asking your horse to be athletic around. You know, is he going to jump something? Is he going to race over something? Is he going to do enduro? Is he going to do dressage? Is he going to do reining? I don't care what. That's what you need. You need D. Now, he can be wider and he can be somewhat narrower either. And that depends on the width of the pelvis and be fine. You know, there's plenty of range there. Just not to have him so narrow that he is in danger of interfering.
Okay.
Right. But typically they will not interfere. Okay. Now what we need to learn, now that we've digested that one.
Yeah.
All right. On the left, you see my well-beloved farrier, Sean Finn, who did for Ollie for years. My other farrier that worked on Ollie was Robert Anderson, who was a real genius with trim. And both these guys were real good to work with. So I asked Sean if he would set Ollie's hoof up on his knee and let me take this picture. And what do you see? Ollie's limb is quite sharply flexed to set up on top of Sean's knee. Where is the stifle?
Well, I'm pointing. You can't see where I'm pointing. Yeah, right. Even with the bill of his hat.
Yes. And is it under the body or wide of the body?
Wide of the body.
Quite. And you see his hock?
Yes.
Which way does it point? Does it point out or does it point toward the midline?
Toward the midline.
Right. And you see his ankle?
Yes.
Does it point out or does it point toward the midline?
It's towards the midline, I guess, because it's
no. Where is the face of his ankle joint that's right near Sean's left pinky? It's oriented straight toward me, standing out wide of the body.
Okay. Sorry.
So what you're looking at there is the plane of assessment seen plumb on from the front.
Okay.
So what does a plane look like when you see it on edge? If you have a sheet
very
of glass,
narrow. Yeah.
it looks like a line.
Yeah. Yeah.
So unless you're at an angle to the plane, you're going to see the edge of the plane, which looks exactly like a line.
Gotcha.
But it's
Okay.
still a plane. It's just you're only seeing the edge square on from the edge.
Right.
So this shows you, everybody that ever watched their farrier shoe their horse or trim the hind legs has seen this, but not realized what it meant. A normal horse, and you see Ollie is pretty much a wide body job. Okay, he had a very round, high rib cage. And like a lot of horses, a lot of gaited horses will have that. And but so did quarter horses. And so when he picked his leg up to swing it forward in movement, the stifle would well clear the ribs, because unless it clears the ribs when he brings the leg up or forward, it will crash into his belly or the last rib, and that's right uncomfortable. Thump, 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 thump.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's exactly what you're getting in horses that are built wrongly, as we just discussed in the other image. Oliver had wonderful conformation. I was very lucky to get him. And I got him for free, well, almost for free. A girlfriend took a clinic from me. and I didn't charge her, and I paid her to haul him down too. So, but she got him for free because she saved his life when he foundered.
Mm.
And that was, by the way, by the same guy I sent you to, Emily, for your lame horse. And but that was back in the day when we were still using blue foam.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there were no hoof boots that were any good for this sort of therapy. So Ollie had foundered, and she saved him, and the owner felt guilty and said, look, it's obvious I got too many horses, so I can't pay you for all you've done, so just take him. And she did take him, and they used him for a pack horse for a while because they didn't have much use for a gaited horse.
Mm-hmm.
And I saw him up at her place in British Columbia one time, and I said, that is no quarter horse. Where did you get that? And she told me the story, and she said, we're looking for a home. And I said, he's one. And let's figure out how we can get this horse down to California.
Yeah.
So, cool. And Oliver was absolutely delightful. What a good horse. What a good boy. So he had excellent, outstanding conformation, almost good enough to be a stud. And the guy that bred him kept him a stud for a few years, tried him a couple of times, but they were looking for color. And he didn't throw the chocolate color that they like in that breed, so they gelded him. And he was happy with that. Ollie's never looking for any kind of trouble. So, but he was, all my horses are useful to me in this teaching, because I can so readily just step out and say, yeah, I know what this horse is going to show us, so I'll just set it up so it does show it. So I'll get somebody to help me and pose the horse, and that'll show that what I'm trying to teach. Now, in the right-hand image is the King of Kings. This is a horse from the 1940s and 50s that's named Greyhound. He's a standard bred trotter. He's the greatest trotting horse that ever lived, just like Secretariat is the greatest flat racer classic distance racer that ever lived. And I love this picture because this is a practice run. Obviously he's in a high-wheeled cart. That's pretty old-fashioned, but they liked to exercise the horse in this type of cart because it gives a kind of a different feel to the horse. And so the trainer is out there on the track with him, and somebody was probably sitting right at on the rail, and took the horse looking at the photographer. He's a very self-aware horse, very intelligent horse. But I want you to look at his left hind leg and notice, where is the stifle? This is at absolute full retraction, not protraction, retraction. This is where the limb swings back. Where's the stifle? Is it under the body?
No,
it's well wide of the body. It's that lump you see And then do you see the hock?
Yeah.
Yeah, you can run a plane right through the hip, the stifle, the hock, and not quite the fetlock or the front of the ankle joint.
Yeah.
Why? Because horses have a inbuilt rotatory capability. It's not very big, but at the stifle joint, at full retraction and at full protraction, there is a slight inward or outward rotation, which means that the horse's hoof faces out even more in full retraction than it would if you were standing up and we were looking at a conformation shot of this horse straight from the back. This is normal movement. It's what it looks like. They don't move like tables. All of the joints are cammed, which I showed you before when I was holding the book up. All the joints are meant to work on angles to each other and an angle to the midline of the body. And you see the right hind hoof, that's in full protraction. Which way is it facing? Is it facing toward the midline? Is it facing away from the midline?
Away.
Right. And the hock above it is facing toward the midline.
The midline.
Toward the midline. And you can't see the stifle, but I promise you it is to the outside.
Yeah.
So what they are is, or the plane of assessment, if my thumbs are the hind legs and my fingertips are the stifles, there, and the horse is facing toward the camera. That's how their hind legs are supposed to be, and in no other way.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, now I know this is totally strange to a majority of people who are watching because you've all been miseducated, and it's a truism of adult education. That adults can only hear what they were expecting to hear. And they also, one thing, Matthew, my mentor at Equus magazine, my friend who was a great veterinarian, Matthew used to say that I didn't understand how to teach. And of course, he's teasing me. But he says, Debbie, you have to realize that most people cannot visualize. And of course, it's handy that I can draw.
Mm-hmm. Because
then I can help you visualize. I can carry this in my head. When I was working for DreamWorks, I was the technical consultant for a couple of films, and one of them was Spirit Stallion of the Cimarron.
We love that movie around here.
Yeah, I pretty much. I mean, Geffen, who ran that outfit, had nutty ideas about how animals are to relate to people, and there is a subtext there about that Mustang should never be ridden. And it's just because he didn't know anything either. but okay, if the overall message that gets through there is that we should be good to our horses and not beat them up. I had to fight hard to not have them portray the U.S. cavalry as the bad guy.
Mm-hmm.
And to mute that. It's not the police force, it's these rogue coyotes that will catch somebody and beat them to death.
Yeah,
it's not the usual cop. Those are bad actors. And it's the same with any outfit you've got. It's the same in the Army. It's always been the same. So you can't blame the cavalry itself for mistreating when a horse gets mistreated. You blame the guy who did it.
Mm-hmm.
And they went out of there. Of course, you make a movie bigger, best, better, faster, more. Everything has to be bigger than life. So the jerk who beats up Spirit is well portrayed. He's a jerk, and that's what you have to be in order to intend to hurt a horse or to use an animal to show how big you are,
mm-hmm.
which is only to show how small you are.
Yeah.
Yeah. So So, but anyway, I digress. To go back to our topic. Now,
Okay.
I picked these because the animals have, there's some variation in how wide-bodied they are, but they are all correctly articulated. Okay, A is a narrower-bodied animal, but you see the hind stifles, the stifles face out, high up, the hocks face in, and the toes face out.
Yep.
And the hind limbs form parallel lines. They don't look
Mhm.
like the letter A.
Mhm.
Okay, B, A was, I think he was an Arab Australian stock horse cross. And that I took that picture when I was in Australia one time. B was sent me by a reader, and that is a real handsome part saddlebred, part quarter horse.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's what my painting horse was too. That's a wonderful cross.
Mhm.
A wonderful idea, and consistently produces very nice horses. So that horse is also correct. And C is a warm blood mare. Now, where is C above the other two? Look at how wide those hocks are.
Oh yeah.
Europeans have their shit together when it comes to breeding legs. They are not troubled by the same misinformation that governs halter judging in the United States. They are biologically trained. The people who are in control of the verbans are qualified, either veterinarians or what used to be called hippologists, professors of hippology at Tübingen University, like Gustav Rau was, or very experienced breeders who have a correct biological training. This is also true. You know, my admiration goes out to the Peruvian Paso for this, because not in the United States, but in Peru, they have a class called zootechnical in Spanish, technical zoology judging. They also have halter class, which is nothing but a show. But they have zootechnico, in which the stallions who are in contention will be tested over about a 3-day period by a panel of at least 3 veterinarians, qualified people with veterinary level training and experience with the breed. And they will be performance tested and gone over with a fine-tooth comb as far as their structure. The winner of the zootechnico is the horse you should breed to. The winner of the halter class, meh, maybe. Okay, that's just a show.
Yeah.
Yeah. So all that stuff that you see in Arab halter, where the horse comes in there about half out of his mind, wild, whipped up. This is to disguise what's wrong with him, not to bring it out. It has nothing to do with protecting the consumer.
Mhm.
And by golly, you need some protection. Guess what? The naive, somebody comes into this as a hobby and wants to buy a horse, and they really know nothing, which is what you know when you first start out. Didn't we all? What are they going to naturally think? Which horse should I breed to? Which horse's foals should I buy? The first thing they think is that the national halter winner is the best horse in the country.
Yeah.
Wrong.
Yeah.
Wrong. Tragically wrong. So often the best horse is a horse that's not intended for competition in any manner. And often they're crossbreds.
Mm-hmm.
Our most neglected breed is the Quayrap. And it's an excellent horse. But I still say we need to take a page out of the European book and start breeding wider hocks. You want your horse to work off the hocks. That's what collection involves. They need to be substantial and not narrow. So the wider the hock is from you see the structure of the hock in view C very well, because that's a very good photo.
Yeah.
You see how it looks like kind of like a box?
Yeah.
It has two upper corners. Put your thumb and your finger on those two corners, and that's how wide the hock is. So you want that hock to be 4 inches, 5 inches, 6 inches wide.
Okay.
The wider, the better. Because why? These are not racehorses. We're talking about riding horses here. Tell me when a thoroughbred racehorse, when he's at the track, performs a down transition.
One time.
Not even then.
Not even then sometimes.
They roll down.
Yeah.
That's not a transition. They just after the race is over and they're going back to the winner's circle or back to the barn, they just let him get slower and slower until it kind of walks. There is no half halt in there anywhere. There's no attempt to cause the horse to couple up. Now, you notice I avoided saying, when is a racehorse in collection? All good racehorses run in collection. Because what's collection? Is the coiling of the back,
right,
followed by the extension of the back, which is what makes for speed. But if they don't coil up good, in other words, if they don't collect and then extend, they're not going to win. So collection comes in even in racing, and this was pointed out by Francois Robichon de la Garinier in like 1735. This has been known forever, that you could exercise the horse at a gallop and benefit his arena work. Sure, of course. And likewise, trail riding over terrain. The intelligent use of terrain is a sign of horsemanship mastery. Understanding how to use terrain to assist in the training of an arena horse is a sign that that person knows what they're doing. Okay, so here are 3 cow-hocked horses. The one on the left happens to be an Arab. The one in the middle is an Appy, and the one on the right is an Anglo-Arab from England. Do you see the difference? Do you see how they all make an A? They all make the letter A.
Yeah, I can see in the lower part. I guess I'm having trouble seeing. I need to see them side by side to see the stifle.
Yeah, and I didn't set it up that way.
Yeah.
When I made these for you to transcribe up.
Yeah.
Maybe those who are viewing this can just play the tape back.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or pause it until they feel like they've got it. The stifle is oriented correctly in A, pretty much in B. It's a little close, and less so in C.
Okay.
So A is showing you undoubtedly it's an Arab, right? So it's going to have a wide rib cage probably, and it's probably going to be rather shorter in the back, which means it's going to have some outturn in the stifle, or else it's not going to move at all. But what happens below is the limb warps inward from the stifle down to the hock. It's like it went new, right? And that's what puts the hock on the inside of the plane of assessment. So if you drop a plane from the level of the hip socket up in the butt area and run that down to the ankle, the hock is going to lie inside of that plane.
Yes, I see that.
Right? Yeah. Now, and in B, it's the same. It's equally obvious. The plane in B is oriented more parallel than it is in A. So if you look at the stifles, they're just a hair more facing straight forward. They're not facing straight forward. They're not parallel to the midline, but they're more close to being parallel to the midline than the stifles are in A. And yet the hocks still warp in from that. And in C, this is a little male horse, a little gelding, and he's like boys are. He's kind of narrow in the hip. your mares, A and B both happen to be mares, are typically wider in the butt, and geldings are often narrower, as he is. And so, yeah, his stifles still face out, but he's a narrower bodied horse. He's a longer backed horse. And so his stifles face out the least. Nonetheless, his hocks are still warped in some. His hocks warp in less than A or even than B, but they still warp in. So
Yes.
none of these horses are built quite right. If I was going to buy one of the three, I'd probably buy C. If I have to live with it, and I just absolutely love this horse on 10 other reasons, I can live with C, but I'm not going to expect this horse to be the cheerful camper when it comes to, let's say, canter departures from a halt, because it's always going to give him a twinge. And horses, remember, they will work on a pain gradient that is like infinitesimally small.
Yeah.
They don't want to have any pain. And it's not like we're even going after hurting him to hurt him. This is like the little pains you get when you get out of bed in the morning. You know, there's that little thing in your hip, or there's that little thing in your bad knee. It's not going to keep you from doing your day's work, but yet you feel it.
Yeah.
People are famous for just overriding their own feelings. Horses are almost incapable of doing that. This is one of the great secrets to the life of the horse on the inside, and how that relates to his performance on the outside. Remember, I quoted Tom Dorrance in our first talk, wherein he says, Debbie, you need to remember that as soon as Painty gets uncomfortable physically, he will start getting uncomfortable mentally or emotionally. Yes. So, you know, if you were going to start over fresh with a brand new purchase and look for the ideal horse, you've seen it in the last image as far as this conformational points goes. Now, do I expect everybody who's watching this to run home and shoot their horse? No. So, well, how else do you use this? You say to yourself, aha, now I see. And your horse looks like C, or your horse looks like A. Now I see. I never saw before, but now I never muchly noticed that before, but now I am able to notice it. And I see that that this is part of the situation I'm in with this horse. So you then are able to not punish him for not wanting to do certain things, or not wanting to do them with complete aplomb or a complete joy. It may take longer to get to the place you want to be. And you now know why.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. Now, unfortunately, there is absolutely nothing you can do to make this better. Nada. And if we ever do another talk and we talk about the front legs, and we're talking about looking at the front legs from the side, another one that would be like that is calf knees. There is absolutely nothing that can be done. Okay, another example is a horse that is too bloody big and heavy. You cannot make him smaller. The major reason why a lot of upper level competitive dressage horses only have 2-year or 3-year careers is because they're too big. You can't do that with that kind of mass and expect the horse to last. So none of my business what they want to show off on. Fine with me. If they think the only way that to impress the onlooker is to have this enormous thing that's almost the size of a shire, I don't care. You can't keep people from being stupid. You can't legislate intelligence. You can't even educate it sometimes, because their focus is on winning.
Mm-hmm.
Their focus is not on, as mine would be, on preserving the horse as a species for the next millennium and beyond. It would not be on having a happy, productive, and pleasant relationship with the horse. It would be on winning. So that's not where I'm coming from. That's not the world I'm living in. So if that's where you are, then maybe you need to go look at a different video. What we want to do with this is make it so we are using what we know about conformation to figure out what our horse's needs are going to be in terms of training. Because a horse with a different structure is going to naturally have different propensities and different likes versus dislikes. And these have been examples of one of them that you can't do much about. There are other conformational things that you can either switch what your expectations were of the horse and make things pretty jolly, or else actually completely correct. But no time for those today, but I assure you they are there, and I certainly don't leave them out of the book. So, as you said to begin with, Emily, this is a book of consequence. I love that choice of words that you did. Yes, it is a consequential book, meaning if you read it, it will cause you to change I hope, the way you think, and also improve your ability to observe reality, instead of, like the old Gobau and Berryer illustration, instead of imposing a left brain image onto reality. Okay, it is, one of my favorite books, and I use this as chapter introduction in mine, short quotations. I love to start chapters with short quotations. And one of them is from the lady who wrote Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain. Okay, and that's a book I want everybody to read, because it explains it is not true that your brain is split and that the two halves do not communicate with each other. That's a wrong idea of how that works. And it's also not true that if you have something that you want to do, that your left brain only does mathematical type of things or calculating kind of things, and your right brain only does visual and integrative, holographic kind of things. No, both halves do some of both. But the amount that they swap in different people differs. And depending on your training, it will be probably, and that was her original motivation, because she was an art teacher, to help people learn how to draw. Well, every normal adult already knows how to draw. The problem is your right brain is probably blocking you, because what the right brain wants to do is look at reality and then make a diagram of it. Okay, so when you ask somebody to draw a hand, not only they say that has some psychological implications, or kind of it's loaded. You might say faces are even more loaded. So loaded subjects turn out to be scary in a way to the old right brain. So if you say to an adult, I want you to draw your hand, I want you to draw my hand, or the model sitting up in the front of the art class is going to hold up their hand, and you're going to have to sketch it. What most adults do as a first approach is they draw a circle with 5 lines. That's what they do, because their right brain has just flooded them with the necessity to reduce that to a diagram. And
I think you mean left brain, right? The left brain wants to make a diagram.
Their left brain is flooding them with so that the right brain can't even get a word in edgewise.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm dyslexic. That's why I get left and right.
Okay.
All the time. So I
My
want
left brain wanted to make sure that it was the right side.
Yeah, right. That's right. Exactly. So that's what we've done in halter class. We have what, and that's what most people do. So one thing I'd love to have is to, back in the day when the American Horse Shows Association was still alive, it is now defunct. But I used to teach judge education seminars for a while. I mean, for certain breeds. And then, but then they went defunct and it's no longer happening. So today, who knows where your judge got his training, if he has any. But if that ever started up again, I would love to see horse show judges be made to take a class, an art class, where we would go draw horses and we would learn to see and to see what reality was. I once volunteered with I had heard while I was working out east, I had heard that a very famous guy who I happen to kind of know was, he's a very famous judge of quarter horse. And he was going to come and judge the Washington National Show and judge the quarter horse classes. So I called him up and asked him if I could junior judge, which basically means you stand behind him all day long with a clipboard in your hand and take notes, and you don't say nothing. And I had no intention of trying to teach him anything. So he said, sure. So I joined him for a couple of days and stood behind him, and as he judged these big, important quarter horse halter classes. And after that time, I had suspected it before, but I was absolutely convinced after having actually done it. And that was one reason I wanted to go do it, to be fair. But I was sure that he had no idea what the bone structure of the leg was. This man was judging quarter horses like they were stuffed with sawdust. They were just silhouette images. And the closer they came to his preordained ideal of a silhouette outline, the higher they scored. Okay, that is another reason why we have narrow hocks. They're not understanding that the horse skeleton is the main basis for athleticism. And of course, then the muscles, tendons, and ligaments that attach to the skeleton come in also very importantly. But the whole thing is based on bone structure. So what do I start the book with? A whole chapter on skeletons. And not only just skeletons, but skeletons of horses whose names and performance records we know. It's not just a skeleton, it's the skeleton of Black Hawk. It's not just another skeleton, it's the skeleton of Ethan Allen, or the skeleton of some other famous standardbred racer, thoroughbred racer, performance horse, draft horse, or whatnot. We have the performance records from these horses, and we have they're infinitely valuable, more valuable with the name and the performance record attached, obviously, than they would be if they were anonymous, just a skeleton gotten at at the killer plant.
Right.
Yes. So that's why I start the book the way I begin it. It's based on bone structure. And once you start and another thing I do is I publish every single museum in the US or any other country that you could probably visit that has mounted horse skeletons. Go to the museum and donate. Because just like with the public libraries, remember that whole, did you hear about that thing? You know, John Steinbeck, the author of, The Grapes of Wrath?
Oh, yeah.
He's from Salinas, California. And about 10 years ago, they almost lost the Salinas Library through an unwillingness to pay enough taxes to support the public library. Right? We cannot let that happen. For a million reasons, but this would be one of the few. One minor reason would be learning about this or anything else. You need the public libraries, and you also need museums. Okay, now back when I was in graduate school in the 1980s and late 70s, the state of Nebraska had elected a governor who apparently was ruined as a little boy. And he said, I cannot imagine anywhere more boring than a museum. Now, it happens that the University of Nebraska has a incredibly wonderful museum with all these tertiary mammals and Pleistocene pachyderms, all right, great big elephants from the Pleistocene, as well as many, many other things. Nebraska is a great place to go collect fossils, and always has been. And they have a place called Memorial Hall, which I wish everybody would visit. I wish everybody would visit the American Museum of Natural History in New York at 79th and Street West. That's the biggest museum in the U.S., and that and the British Museum are the two greatest museums in the world. Go visit the Smithsonian Natural History Museum, where I used to work. Go visit the University of Florida at Gainesville, if Ron DeSantis does not make them go extinct. Go to the Texas A&M. Go to my alma mater, which is the University of Kansas or the University of Michigan. Both of them have wonderful natural history museums, where you will see the mounted skeletons of not only horses, but other mammals and also dinosaurs. Most museums, Field Museum in Chicago, you got to go see Sue the Tyrannosaurus, but they also have bone halls with mounted skeletons of horses and other mammals. This is where you learn your skeleton. There is no other way to do it. Now, the only thing that gets better than actually a field trip to the Field Museum would be to go in the Discovery Center at the Field Museum, and where they might, I don't know what they have exactly, but they probably have some horse bones that you can actually touch, examine, photograph, appreciate. Bring your book with you. If you have a copy of my book, bring it with you. Go to the Discovery Room, ask the attendant if they might have some horse bones, and then start looking and look and look and look. You will find what I have just taught in this session on exhibit. Another place would be the Los Angeles County Museum of Natural History in California. Also, the George C. Page Museum, which is at the La Brea Tar Pits.
Yeah, it's cool there.
Yeah, it is very, very cool. So not all states, but most states have a good, if not excellent, museum that you can visit. If you're Canadian, once the fires go out, maybe this fall, but go up to Drumheller, and there is a wonderful museum in Drumheller, Alberta, north of Calgary. Beautiful. Or the Royal Ontario Museum. If you're in Mexico, there's a Museum of Natural, Museo de Historia Natural in Mexico City. If you're in Argentina, likewise. There are these great institutions, but they need tax dollars in order to stay alive. And they need your donations when you come in the door. Be as generous as you can.
Well, we're members to the Denver Museum of Nature and Science, and they have wonderful horse skeletons there. So yeah.
How many do they have? I don't even really know.
They have one full-size horse and then several of the different evolutionary variations. So you can see them side by side. Yeah,
the typical horse evolution exhibit, but at least they have the whole skeleton there. Yes. But go compare that, if they have a rhino or a tapir, those are close relatives of horses. They're in the same order of mammals as the Perissodactyla, same grouping as horses. closely related and yet very different proportionally. You know, think how heavy-bodied and stout a rhino is versus a horse. And it's that compare and contrast lesson that will just add joy to your discovery. I love it when students have that aha moment and they go, oh my God, that's how that works. Now I see it. Or like I said the other day, funny story, lady at the end of the class says, Dr. Deb, is that what I see? And what she really kind of means was, I do see it, and it astonishes me that I never noticed that before. One question I get all the time from people is, why haven't I heard this anywhere else before? And the answer to that is because of Gobau and Berrier, because it took over people's, that seemed like a good way to explain things. It turns out to be a faulty way, and it misleads, not because they meant to, but that's a fact. It doesn't explain it completely. It doesn't explain it sufficiently or correctly. Only when you've got it correct are you going to be able to start really, really getting down to cases on selecting a horse.
Well, now I'm excited to go run over and do my chores and look at my horse's hindquarters.
Yes. And if you have any questions, you can Zoom me up tomorrow. Okay.
Sounds great. Well, thank you so much. This has been really a lot of fun.
Yes, me too. I enjoyed it also. So
okay.
Thanks, Emily. You're
all right. Thanks, Dr. Deb.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.